Today, we become legends.
Alright boys, we're back with another alignment chart video. This time we're doing the magical damage items. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for the upcoming alignment charts where I'll cover the tank items and the bruiser items, which will be the final two in this series. If you're new to my alignment chart videos that are a little bit different to your typical tier list, we're going to be placing on two axes here. We have the x-axis across the horizontal, which is further towards the left, you're a more early game item, you want to buy it early in your build. Further towards the right, more late game item, kind of tops off your build, like 5th and 6th slot kind of thing. And then on the y-axis here, we have damage versus utility. So is the item purely just for damage, you get nothing else out of it, or does it have some utility like some health, some cooldown reduction, some extra effects, things like that? And yeah, we obviously place on both of these axes at once, so something in this bottom left quadrant is early game and also quite utility focused, top right quadrant is damage focused, late game items, etc. But the best way to explain it, I think, is to just place something and you'll probably understand it. So let's place Bancroft's Talon here. So Bancroft's Talon is definitely an early game item. It's something you buy often first item, especially on gods like Anubis and things like that, or like maybe second item. But like really you want to be getting your lifesteal online early if you're going for like a Bancroft style build. Generally if you're going Bancroft, it's because you rely on it, you know, you're like a Hades, you're an Anubis, something like that. So very much an early game item, you know, probably one of the most early game ones besides perhaps stacking items. And then in terms of damage utility, it's mostly damage, but it does have a little bit of utility in that it does actually provide very strong healing. So we'll put it a little bit further down, somewhere around there. I guess these are in alphabetical. I kind of want to place them in like groups though. Like place all the lifesteal items, all the rings, all the books and things like that. Maybe I'll do that instead. So we'll place Typhon's Fang here. So in terms of damage utility, it's probably on a similar level to Bancroft's. You know, it does provide some utility in that like you get extra healing from your lifesteal and it has some lifesteal on it itself, but it's also like mostly a damage item. And then you build it later than Bancroft's, but usually not super late. Usually if you're buying a Typhon's Fang, it's like because your build is like very good with the Typhon's Fang, you know, either you have a Bancroft or you have some other lifesteal from things like Soul Gem and stuff like that. So generally, you're not getting Typhon's Fang super late in your build, but it's definitely later than you would get a Bancroft. So we'll maybe put it somewhere like here. Soul Gem. Soul Gem's a weird one because you can kind of just buy Soul Gem whenever you want in your build, and it's generally going to be quite good. And then in terms of damage utility, it's a little bit skewed towards utility actually, to be completely honest with you. You know, it's strong healing, cooldown reduction, comes with some health, can heal your teammates as well. It's actually a very good utility focused item. And then I think, yeah, in the early late like category, I think it's just going to be right in the middle because generally it's an all-rounder. You can buy Soul Gem in any slot in your build and you're pretty happy with it actually. And finally from the lifesteal stuff we have Pyth Piece, so fairly utility heavy as well. You know, these lifesteal ones are generally going to be a little bit more utility heavy than some of the just like full damage items, but obviously Pythagorean's Piece gives that aura of like lifesteal and I believe it's power to your teammates. Also comes with some health on the item and things like that. I'd say it's a very similar level of utility to Soul Gem actually, maybe slightly less, so we'll put it like there. And then in terms of early late, I feel like generally you get Pyth early, but you don't have to. You can get it a little bit later in your build, so we'll put Pyth like there. And since it's the next one up alphabetically, let's do the books. So we'll start with Book of Dead. Obviously pretty heavily utility based, you know, you get that shield based on your max mana. But it does have a little bit of damage as well. And then generally you're building this later in the game. You know, with the Book of the Dead, it's one of those items that kind of relies on some other items in your build. You know, if you're going Book of the Dead, you probably want Book of Thoth in your build, or at least some heavy mana items somewhere. So generally with Book of Thoth, you're getting it later, you know, 4th, 5th, 6th slot, that kind of thing, once you already have some mana items online. So we'll put it like here. Book of Thoth, on the other hand, exact opposite end of the spectrum. Book of Thoth is obviously something you build early. Stacking items in general is something you basically have to build first item, you know. If you're going them like second or third item, it's very risky because you might not get the stacks online fast enough for it to be like competitive with other people's builds and stuff. So generally with stacking items, you have to build them like super early first item. So that's where Book of Thoth is going to reside in that regard. In terms of damage utility, it's just full damage, right? I guess it does provide some like very heavy amount of mana, so maybe we'll take it down slightly. If we put it like here or something. It's definitely less utility than Bancroft's, I would say, but it's not full damage because you do get some mana. Polynomicon, another one of the books. Generally, I feel like this is built mid to late game. Once again, Polynomicon, the damage from it scales on your magical power, so generally you want it later in the build when you already have a lot of magical power online. But probably slightly earlier than Book of the Dead, I would say. It's a little bit less build reliant than Book of the Dead. And then in terms of damage utility, it's like mostly damage. I mean, yeah, it has some lifesteal, but other than that, it's basically full damage. And I feel like I'm missing a book here. Oh yeah, Soul Reaver. So Soul Reaver is just literally full damage. I don't think there's any utility stats on Soul Reaver at all, aside from maybe a tiny bit of mana, so we'll drag it down slightly. And then in terms of early late, Reaver's generally built quite late, probably on a similar level to Book of the Dead in terms of like 4th, 5th, 6th item, because it's percent health damage and stuff like that. We'll leave Reaver like there. Since we're next up, we'll do the whole Lost Artifact tree with Chronos Pendant, Roddzahuti, Charon's Coin, that kind of stuff. So Charon's Coin, I hate this item. Anyone that knows me or knows my videos knows that I rant about Charon's Coin all the time because I think it's a bad item design. Percent pen on a stacking item just makes no sense to me because you want percent pen late in the game, but you want a stacking item early in the game. You know, it's like like the Book of Thoth that I placed. You want this early. You want this early as well because you want to stack it up, but then it's a percent pen item, so you want it late. So it's very weird. But I feel like most people that do buy Charon's Coin buy it early. You know, generally people don't buy Charon's Coin late. If it's super late in the game, you're generally just better getting Obsidian Shard because it gives you all the stats immediately up front without having to stack it. So we'll put Charon's like fairly early game just because it's a stacking item. But I can't with good conscience put it right at the end here because it's a percent pen item. I'd feel so bad putting a percent pen item right at the like edge of early game. So we'll put it like here or something. And then damage utility, I think somewhere in the middle is pretty fair for Charon's Coin actually. You know, you're looking at some decent damage, some percent pen and stuff like that, but then you're also looking at movement speed and HP 5 and MP 5 and stuff like that, decent regen stats. We'll maybe skew it slightly towards damage, but I feel like Charon's Coin does have some fair amount of utility considering other mage items. Chronos Pendant, so generally built earlier, but can also be built late, to be completely honest. Chronos Pendant's kind of like Soul Gem in a way, in that you can kind of build it wherever in your build and you're pretty alright with it. It's just like generally if you want Chronos Pendant in your build, you can build it. You know, it's fine. It's just a matter of whether you do even want Chronos Pendant in your build or not, you know, if your CDR allows for it. Speaking of CDR though, it's got a fair bit of utility, you know, probably a similar amount to Soul Gem I would say, because 20% cooldown plus the passive is cooldown plus it gives some MP 5. So probably around there. And then in terms of early late, I feel like I'll skew it slightly late, but you can also build this like sort of in the middle of your build or maybe even early and it'd probably be pretty fine. It's a generally quite all-round item you can buy whenever you want. We have Roddzahuti and Doom Orb as the final two. So Roddzahuti, obviously a generally late game item. Sometimes it gets picked up as like a rush. There was that meta a while back where you would rush Roddzahuti after they buffed it as your first item, but as far as I know, that's not too popular anymore. Generally, across the history of Smite, this has been a late game powerhouse item, not a rush. I just wanted to mention that because I know we recently did have a meta where you would rush Roddzahuti and some people, if they just played in that meta, they might think, oh, super early game item, Roddzahuti, but it's not. It's generally like a late game big powerhouse item, like Heartseeker for physicals. So it's going to be one of the most late game items we put on here, and in terms of damage utility, it's just like pure damage, right? I mean, it has a tiny amount of MP 5, I believe, but it's just damage, penetration to deal more damage, and then a passive that deals more damage if they're lower health. You know, it's just damage, let's be real. And finally, we have Doom Orb, so once again, a stacking item, probably going to be put pretty towards the early game. Maybe not quite as early game as Book of Thoth, because Doom Orb works a little bit different in how it stacks. You don't have to build it like quite as early, I won't say, but it's generally like a very early game item. And then in terms of damage utility, Doom Orb is like, it's got more utility than Book of Thoth, more utility than Bancroft's Talon, probably about the same. So we'll put them like there, because Doom Orb does have like movement speed and stuff like that, which movement speed is utility, that's for sure. You know, it's not a damage stat, it is utility. But generally, like, Doom Orb is, like, you buy Doom Orb for a lot of, like, really high power, basically. Let's do the Spear tree next, like Flat Pen and Obsidian Shard. So Divine Ruin, generally built early game. You know, Flat Pen items are generally going to be built early game because Flat Pen is better early on before people get, like, all their really heavy protections online. Then you want to be building Percent Pen. You know, Flat Pen early game, Percent Pen late game, which is why I was ranting about Charon's Coin earlier. So this one, generally pretty early game. And then in terms of damage utility, it's probably slightly skewed towards damage, I would say, just because, like, it's got Flat Pen and it's got power, but also it does have some utility for sure. You know, the anti-heal is very good on it. You know, it's a lot of the time the reason you buy this is because you're against a healer and you need anti-heal. Spear of Desolation, however, is going to be more damage focused, but built, you know, in a similar place to Divine Ruin. Generally, if you're buying Flat Pen, it's like in your second slot after, like, a first item of, like, you know, whatever you want to build. This does have like some cooldown reduction and a CDR passive though, so we'll bring it down ever so slightly. Probably more utility based than Book of Thoth, thinking about it. And then yeah, around there is probably fine for Spear of Desolation. Spear of the Magus is a similar idea. Obviously it's very similar to Spear of Desolation in that it's just like an early Flat Pen item. It just has like slightly different applications with certain gods. So we'll put it just like basically on top of Spear of Desolation here. Try not to cover it up too much though. And finally, we have Obsidian Shard. So this is a very late game item. I would buy it in a similar place to Soul Reaver and Book of the Dead, maybe slightly later. Obviously, Percent Pen item, you know, you want Percent Pen items late in your build. Buying Percent Pen early feels really bad. Because, like, squishy characters in the early game have, like, 30 protections tops. And 30 protections, 20% of that is, like, 6 pen. So it's, like, it's kind of bad, to be honest, to buy percent pen early. So definitely a more late game with Obsidian Shard. And then damage utility, it's mostly damage, you know. The only utility it has is having pen, and that's just so you can deal more damage, right? So it's probably, like, somewhere up here. So we're left with rings, and then the kind of, like, health, bruiser items, plus Staff of Myrden. So we'll place rings now. Demonic Grip, you know, obviously the rings are, like, kind of hard to compare to the burst damage items because they're very different and built on very different gods. Generally, Demonic Grip is built kind of like mid-game, you know, it's kind of like Executioner with Hunters in that you build it like 3rd or 4th item or something like that to start getting your percent pen online, because ADCs, which is what build Demonic Grip, you know, the magical ADCs, they want to actually be shredding tanks down, so getting percent pen online on magical ADCs is more important than getting it online on your burst mage, because your burst mage is generally targeting squishies like the enemy mage, the enemy hunter, that kind of stuff. Whereas like your hunter and your magical ADC, that they can target tanks very effectively, and so they build percent pen earlier than you normally would, which is why Demonic is like here rather than over here with Obsidian Shard. Because generally Demonic Grip is built kind of mid-game, and then damage utility, you know, it's just damage, right? Just damage and then pen to get more damage. Hastened Ring. I feel like Hastened Ring's generally built later than Demonic Grip. You know, like 1 or 2 slots after Demonic Grip, so probably somewhere around here. And then damage utility, it's mostly damage, but it does have more utility than Demonic Grip because it has that, like, haste passive and stuff like that. Ring of Hecate, generally built quite early in magical ADC builds. You know, around, like, 1st or 2nd item, so probably somewhere around here. And then we're looking at, like, a little bit of utility because of the lifesteal, and I believe it, like, steals power or something like that, this item. It might not be power, but it steals something, I believe. Been a while since I've played magical ADCs, as you can probably tell, but yeah, probably somewhere around here for a Ring of Hecate. And finally, Telekinesis Ring. Telekine's kind of interesting. I feel like recently it's seen a resurgence of being built early, but normally it's kind of, like, around maybe after your Demonic Grip or, like, similar to your Hastened, it's usually about here, but I feel like it's had a little bit of a surge where it's being built a little earlier than normal, so maybe I'll skew it over slightly. And then damage utility is pure damage. You know, there's basically no utility stats on Telekinesis Ring, it's just damage, and then a passive that deals more damage. And so we're left with the kind of like bruisery items, or I guess we'll play Staff of Myrden first. So Staff of Myrden, kind of an interesting one. Generally, I feel like it's built later, for sure, you know, like, in terms of, like, your team fighting, that's when you want to be building this item to get, like, the maximum value out of it. Utility, like, technically it can have utility, because you could, like, ult and then double cast an ability that has utility, if you feel me on that, but it is mostly damage. And a lot of the time, you're just going to be, like, ulting and then casting a damage ability twice to deal, like, big boy damage, so we'll put it up, like, here. And yeah, we're left with the kind of, like, bruisery health items, so we'll place Warlocks, because it's very easy. Fully early games, same as Book of Thoth, you know, they require the same stat count, they both stack in the same way in terms of off of minions, they're the same amount of early game, you build them first item basically, or you don't build them. And then, obviously, it's slightly more utility than Book of Thoth, given that it's got health and stuff like that on it. Ethereal Staff, generally built later, I feel like, you know, and it's mostly built in Guardian or like Mage Solo builds and stuff like that, built sort of 4th or 5th item, maybe even 6th item. So generally built a bit later, probably somewhere in this kind of no man's land area that we have here is where Ethereal Staff would sit pretty nicely, I think. And then damage utility, in fact, right there is probably in a pretty good spot, I would say, because it does have some utility, you know, it has health, it has CCR, it has a passive that steals health and mana from people, you know, definitely a bit of utility there, we'll drop it like there. Gem of Isolation, I hate this item, generally built kind of like later-ish, but probably not as late as Ethereal Staff, I wouldn't say, because generally if you're buying Gem, you're a god that's like a little bit reliant on Gem, otherwise you're kind of not buying it because it's kind of a bad item. And then in terms of damage utility, probably a similar level to Ethereal Staff, maybe slightly more, because the slow is pretty valuable. And finally we have Rod of Asclepius, generally built kind of early-ish, maybe like mid-game, like early mid-game. Once again, if you're buying this item, you're definitely buying this item because you're a healer, and if you're not a healer, you're not buying it. So, like, generally built kind of like early to mid-game, I would say. And then it's got a lot of utility, for sure. Maybe like here or something. Let's compare. Probably more utilities than Divine Ruin, actually. So maybe like somewhere in the middle here. Then again, maybe it has more utility than some of these ones down here. Maybe it's like down here, because like the healing increase is like very valuable, and generally this just has like a lot of utility stats like health and things like that. It's not too much of a damage item. I know it does have power, but like it's generally like, I'd probably say it is the most utility out of all the mage items. But then obviously, you know, it's mage items. This chart has come out with 5 items in the utility section and 20 items in the damage section. it's just kind of how it is, because mages want to do damage. Generally, they're not building for like tanky stats and utility and debuffs and stuff like that. They're building to just nuke people. But yeah, we can see that like if you do want some utility in your build, these are the items you'll generally be going for. And you can see that like this cluster of items here are generally like either build-arounds like Ring of Hecate or Bancroft's Talon, or they're like flat pen like these 3, or they're stacking items like these 4. You know, generally early game, that's what you're building on mages. You're building either your stacking item, your early game build around power spike, or flat pen. That's generally what you're building like early game on mages. And then late game, you have stuff like percent pen, percent health damage, you know, Roddzahuti is like the big late game top off item, that kind of stuff. So yeah, hopefully this gave you like a better understanding of the magical damage items in Smite. Be sure to stick around for the bruiser and the tank items, which will be coming out soon. Those will be the final 2 alignment charts, at least for now, until I come up with like some other ideas for these, because I do like doing these. They're very nice like alternative to a typical tier list where you can kind of display a little bit more information, and you guys seem to enjoy them too. So yeah, stick around for those, and I will catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.